Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm Amy Rogstad, and today I am going to show you how I paint over a painting that I don't necessarily like, or I don't like the direction it's going in, so I'm starting over. Also, I'm going to be doing some more testing of the Arrtx Pudding Gouache. So this is a newer paint on the market, and you can purchase it on Amazon. The containers that it comes in are these aluminum tins that you unscrew. Initially, and I'm still pretty frustrated with this container system. I would definitely prefer if it was in a tube. I find them to be very messy and they're hard to open. And in this instance that I'm showing right now, I actually thought that the paint had dried up. So I'm kind of taking this circular thing out of the tube. And then I go into trying to scrape all the paint off of it. I'm pretty curious about what this is. And it's not until I get all of the paint off and rinse it off that I figure out that it's a piece of plastic. It's like the seal that they use to, I would assume, to help keep the container airtight so that the gouache stays dry. It sort of caused a mess, and I ended up just throwing that away. Because I also couldn't figure out how to get it back in. It didn't really fit in the lid very well. And here you can see the rubber seal. I found that if I tap on the container first, that it's a little bit easier to get open, kind of like tapping open like a jar of pickles or a jar of jelly. I mainly wanted to see how these paints behaved when I painted over something I previously painted. So this first start of this painting that I have laid down, I used watercolor. So the paints that I initially started out with using were the Paul Rubens paints. So my idea was painting over that whole painting using the Arrtx Gouache. So I like how they mix, the Arrtx Gouache. I think they mix well. I think they lay down fine. They do some pretty decent coverage. As you can see, I painted like the dark pieces of this painting. So and now I'm going in with a lighter version of that turquoise color. I mixed a lot of white in just to see how that covers. Which, I mean, it covered very well. It didn't do a ton of picking up of the watercolor below it. Now we have a little puppy break. My dog was making a ton of noise in the background with his toy. And so at this point, I got really frustrated with trying to be super tedious and meticulous with the painting and trying to get into every little detail of it. So I decided that I was going to go loose. And I'm only using one brush for this. I painted the entire background that turquoise color. There was a little bit of pickup of the watercolor underneath, so it kind of got a little bit more green to it. And then I'm going in now with red over that turquoise color after it was completely dried, just to see, one, coverage, and two, in this painting, I decided to do a little test to see if I could only paint using one brush. So I'm using a 3/4 flat brush for this now. I really like the texture that I got in the background of the turquoise. And then the red over it definitely does lay down really well. And at this point, I got really frustrated with opening the containers, so I switched over to the Turner Design Gouache because I was just frustrated and I was at the point of where I just wanted to give up. I couldn't open the, I think it's raw umber that's in the pudding gouache, or it's raw umber or burnt umber. It's one of the brown colors. But I couldn't open the tube or the container, and then I couldn't open the black container either. And I didn't want to go down and get like a wrench to try to wrench it apart. So I quit. I moved over to Turner Gouache just to finish this painting. And I think what I would recommend if you do buy the pudding gouache is that you depot it and put the paint in something else, just because it was so frustrating. I don't know if I'm putting the cap on too tight or too loose. I just kind of put it on like how I would put on anything that comes in a jar like that. So I don't know, I think the paint probably dried around the edges too much and kind of like glued itself together. But once I switched over to the Turner Gouache, since I'm more comfortable using Turner Gouache, I kind of had a lot more fun with this painting and testing out using just one paintbrush. So I was able to get in the stems of these mushrooms and add in some highlights for the stems and just really playing around with using the one brush to see how I can use the brush in different situations. So I use it on its side quite a bit to get those thin lines. I go in and use the corners of the brush to do the like shadows on the smaller mushrooms. Here I'm doing the flat side to do a really big shadow on these larger mushrooms, and now I'm going in and using more of the edge and the tip to create the shadow on these smaller mushrooms. So I think this is a really good practice too for anyone, just to kind of learn brush control and like the different ways you could use the same brush. And this painting is messy, it's sloppy. I'm just having fun. I'm not going for like any sort of masterpiece here. But I like how the end result turned out. Now I'm adding in white to address some of the highlights. So I'm using the corner of the brush quite a bit here and just the edge of it. I don't know why, but I find cleaning out my paintbrush super satisfying when the water changes color. And the white I'm using is actually the Da Vinci gouache because I ran out of Turner gouache in white. For the mushroom spots, I'm just using the tip of the brush. It's kind of giving the look that I'm using a round brush. And I thought this was actually the funnest part because I just love doing like paint marks and just like dabbing paint on stuff and hoping that it turns out super cool. So I would definitely recommend as like an exercise to do is just grabbing one brush and some paint and seeing what you can paint with that one brush. And I would definitely recommend going large so that you can not only cover a huge area of the paper, but cover the little tiny details as well. Just because you can do so much with one brush that's larger as opposed to like one brush that's smaller. If you use a larger brush, it kind of forces you to lose that control because the brush is so big that your painting just naturally ends up to be a lot looser because your brush can't necessarily get into all of those tight areas and make like perfectly defined paint strokes. Now I'm adding in the shadows. So, moral of this video, try something new. If you get the pudding gouache, definitely depot it. Put it in a different container that doesn't have a giant screw lid. You'll be fine. I think the paints worked really well. They covered up most of the stuff that I was trying to cover up. And that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. If you have any recommendations of what I should paint next, let me know in the comments below. Bye!